Well, good morning, everybody. On behalf of the OSS Society, I'd like to thank you for attending today's dedication of the Office of Strategic Services Memorial, which is located in the same section as OSS founder General William Donovan's grave. It's fitting that the memorial is located on Roosevelt Drive. President Roosevelt created the OSS. It's also close to the gravesite of President John F. Kennedy, who gave Special Forces permission to wear their signature green berets and created the U.S. Navy SEALs. Both units trace their lineage to the OSS, and it sits on the opposite side of the Potomac, directly across from the OSS headquarters on Navy Hill. I hope all of you have received a booklet published by the OSS Society for today's ceremonies. It contains biographies of OSS personnel whose remains were never recovered. And I'd like to thank Peter Sefton and Susan Strange for their hard work compiling this information. We're going to make this publication available to everybody who visits Arlington. For the presentation of colors and the national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance, it's my honor to introduce Admiral Eric Olson and Heather Hopkins. Admiral Olson retired from the United States Navy as an admiral in 2011 after more than 38 years of military service. He served in special operations units throughout his career, was engaged in several contingency operations, and commanded at every level. Admiral Olson was the first Navy SEAL officer to be promoted to 3- and 4-star rank. His career culminated as the head of the United States Special Operations Command, where he led over 60,000 people and managed an annual budget of more than $10 billion. His many decorations include the Defense and Navy Distinguished Service Medals, the Silver Star, and the Legion of Merit. To sing the national anthem, it's my honor to introduce Heather Hopkins, whose grandfather served in the OSS. She's worked and served in the national security field, both in and out of government, for over 20 years. She's managed offices and led teams at the White House, the Departments of State and Defense, and on Capitol Hill. Her most recent government tour was at the Pentagon, where she served in 3 unique roles: Chief of Staff to the Secretary of the Army, Special Assistant to the Deputy of Defense, and started the Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. And she recently joined Amazon as head of their defense policy.
Good morning. Thank you, Charlie, for your initiative and your coordination for today's event, you and your team, Charles. If you can, please rise for the presentation of the colors, the singing of the national anthem, and the Pledge of Allegiance. Honor Guard, advance the colors.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, Heather. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor Guard, retire the colors.
Thank you. Thanks. It's my honor to introduce the Reverend Father Richard Kim, who will now give the invocation. He retired from active duty military services in 1971. His last position before retirement was Deputy Commander of the 1st Special Forces Group in Okinawa, Japan, and he was ordained to the priesthood in 1974.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and Holy Spirit. Father, with profound gratefulness, we dedicate this memorial, sign of the cross, sitting on hallowed ground. God bless the ceremony of honor of men and women of the OSS. May all who pass by bow their heads and remember the sacrifices on behalf of the beloved country, America, land of the free and home of the brave. God bless America. We ask this in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, our Savior. Amen.
It's now my honor to introduce the Deputy Director of the CIA, the Honorable David Cohen, a position he previously held from 2015 to 2017. Prior to serving as CIA Deputy Director, Cohen served as Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence in the Department of the Treasury. He supervised the Office of Foreign Assets Control and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, where he administered sanctions against Russia, Iran, North Korea, and terrorist organizations. Director Cohen, thank you.
Thank you, Charles. And to the members of the OSS Society, thank you for the tremendous work over many years to make this long overdue tribute possible. It's always a privilege to represent the men and women of the CIA, and I feel particularly honored to do so here on our nation's most hallowed ground and the final resting place of 26 CIA officers killed in the line of duty. These brave officers represent the very best of America. Arlington National Cemetery itself reflects the qualities of the OSS officers we commemorate today: a quiet dignity, unity, a sense of purpose, sacrifice. It is fitting that we honor the OSS here, not far from William Donovan's gravesite, and that we do so in this way, with the understated yet profound tribute we will unveil this morning. Solid but unassuming, concise but clear, polished but a bit rough around the edges. I think OSS officers would see themselves in this memorial. Throughout World War II, OSS officers played pivotal roles, unknown to the public and often misunderstood within their own government. But for the president, they made sense of the chaos. For the enemy, they created havoc behind the lines. And for those of us who carry on their legacy, the OSS set the high standards we seek to emulate every day. These standards are not just about running daring operations in hostile territory, although William Wild Bill Donovan would certainly enjoy that. A deeper lesson, as Donovan knew so well, as his example inspires us to remember, is that the strength of the OSS came from the strength of America. After the war, Donovan said our allies would often warn him that the, quote, mixture of nationalities was a weakness, one that could be exploited by the enemy. But Donovan was proud that the OSS converted this so-called liability into a great asset. In an interview after the war, he said, quote, only America's melting pot could mobilize such a body of experts in the knowledge of other countries, and we did it to the great advantage of our war effort. And Donovan didn't just talk the talk. Among many other examples, the OSS employed over 400 Asian Americans, including 219 Japanese Americans, some with families in internment camps. Donovan also insisted that assignments went to the most qualified officers at a time when race and gender were all too often barriers for entry and barriers for promotion. His approach inspired tremendous loyalty and left a lasting impression. 50 years after World War II, Sergeant Barbara Lowers reflected on her career as an OSS linguist and interrogator. She said, "My contribution was accepted and even appreciated. I was the interrogator of prisoners of war. My driver was a major. I bore the responsibility." Donovan knew that rewarding talent over any other factor was what made the OSS successful. In September 1945, at the final gathering of OSS employees, Donovan told them, "We have come to the end of an unusual experiment. This experiment was to determine whether a group of Americans constituting a cross-section of racial origins, of abilities, temperaments, and talents could meet and risk an encounter with a long-established and well-trained enemy organizations. How well that experiment has succeeded is measured by your accomplishments and by the recognition of your achievements." Donovan understood that tapping into the talents of all Americans made the OSS stronger, and he believed that a stronger OSS was a key to ending the war and the killing more quickly. As usual, history proved Donovan right. Before closing, I would like to turn our focus back to the memorial that we will see this morning. The inscription is a perfect tribute to our profession. It's a bit mysterious, it's blunt, and it provides no personal characteristics or identifying information whatsoever. It encompasses all who served and sacrificed. In fact, visitors will only learn one thing about those who are remembered here, that they served in the Office of Strategic Services. I am positive that Bill Donovan would appreciate that. This memorial honors the officers of the OSS and their sacrifices, but it also honors the ideals and principles that shaped Donovan's OSS. Values that were ahead of its time, values that saved lives, values that should inspire us all today. Thank you.
Before introducing the next speaker, I wanted to say a few words about someone whose presence here today is greatly missed, our former Executive Vice President, Major General Victor Hugo, who sadly passed away a few years ago. In fact, shortly before this memorial was approved by Arlington National Cemetery. But General Hugo, for those of you who knew him, really was the embodiment of the OSS and Special Forces. I don't think anybody would be more pleased by the ceremony that's being held today than General Hugo, and we're going to honor him tonight at the Donovan Award dinner by presenting an award in his honor. It's now my honor to introduce Assistant Secretary of State for the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, the successor to the OSS Research and Analysis Branch, the Honorable Brett Holmgren. Prior to assuming his current position, Assistant Secretary Holmgren served for 14 years in key leadership positions in the intelligence community, the White House, and at the Department of Defense. During the Obama administration, Assistant Secretary Holmgren served on the National Security Council staff as Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Intelligence Programs, Senior Policy Advisor to the Assistant to the President for Homeland Security and Counterterrorism, and Director for Counterterrorism. At the Department of Defense, he served as Special Assistant to the Deputy Secretary of Defense, where he was responsible for the intelligence, cybersecurity, technology, and special operations portfolios. Secretary Holmgren also served for 8 years in the intelligence community as a senior analyst at the Central Intelligence Agency, and prior to that as a counterterrorism analyst at the Defense Intelligence Agency, and as an analyst he deployed to war zones to provide support to counterterrorism operations. Assistant Secretary Holmgren.
In the book of Isaiah, it is written that the Lord said, "Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?" The prophet Isaiah responded, "Here I am, Lord, send me." Today, we honor those who were killed in action while serving in the Office of Strategic Services. We honor the 125 selfless Americans who answered the call and said, "Here I am, Lord, send me." These patriots included men like Lieutenant James H. Gall. Born in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania, Lieutenant Gall was the son of an organist and choir master who went on to attend St. Albans Preparatory School in Washington, where he played football. After graduating from Harvard University, he earned a PhD in anthropology and traveled around Europe and the Middle East. He was fluent in 6 languages, became a master linguist, and taught in Paris and at Brooklyn College. Now, Lieutenant Gall joined the OSS as a member of the U.S. Naval Reserve while stationed in Cairo shortly after World War II began. Due to his linguistic skills and deep regional expertise, he was asked to serve on the prestigious DAWS mission to support resistance activities, set up intelligence networks, and rescue downed airmen behind enemy lines in western Slovakia. Reports indicate that Lieutenant Gall was essential to the team's survival after its retreat into the mountains. Drawing on his language skills, he led scouting parties, purchased food from local farmers, and assisted the wounded. But after being injured and captured by the Germans on December 26, 1944, Lieutenant Gall and several of his OSS comrades were sent to a concentration camp and executed. His remains were never found. In many ways, Lieutenant Gall's background reminds me of the many officers and analysts in the State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, which I am honored to lead. As a direct descendant of the research analysis branch of the OSS, INR has long prided itself on upholding the legacy of this iconic service through its commitment to developing deep expertise on the full range of foreign policy issues. Like Lieutenant Gall, dozens of our officers hold PhDs and are fluent in multiple languages. Many have lived and served abroad or have prior military service. Simply put, Lieutenant Gall's legacy endures in institutions like INR. Today, the world is at another inflection point, and once again, America is leading the contest for the future of our world. From the People's Republic of China to Russia, autocrats are seeking to undermine democracy and upend the rules-based international order that men like Lieutenant Gall and others in the OSS died fighting to protect. But as President Biden reminds us, these competitors mistakenly believe democracy is weaker than autocracy because they fail to understand that a nation's power springs from its people. As the United States once again defends democracy around the world, we draw strength and inspiration from the stories of the OSS members. We are gathered here to honor this solemn morning. And on behalf of the Department of State, I would like to read a letter to the OSS Society from our 71st Secretary of State, Antony J. Blinken. Dear members of the OSS Society, on the occasion of the dedication of the OSS Memorial at Arlington National Cemetery, I would like to recognize on behalf of the Department of State the extraordinary sacrifices and contributions the OSS made during World War II. I especially want to honor the 125 OSS members for whom this memorial is dedicated and who paid the ultimate sacrifice in service to the nation. The contributions of these brave Americans, as well as the nearly 13,000 men and women who served in the OSS, played a vital role in generating intelligence, informing diplomacy, cultivating popular resistance, and conducting special operations to enable American victory during World War II. In many ways, the OSS legacy endures in the institutions it created. State Department's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, the CIA, U.S. Special Operations Command. At the Department of State, INR honors the OSS legacy every day by speaking truth to power and providing strategic intelligence to empower diplomacy. On behalf of a grateful department, I extend my deepest gratitude for the honorable service and contributions of the OSS members who gave their lives in defense of the values, ideals, and freedoms we all cherish. May their sacrifice and service continue to be an inspiration for all those who follow in their footsteps. Sincerely, Anthony J. Blinken, October 18th, 2022. Thank you. God bless the OSS, and God bless the United States of America. That's off of here.
Great. Thank you very much. It's now my honor to introduce Major General Benjamin Matra, U.S. Air Force. Major General Matra is the Director, Force Structure, Requirements, Resources, and Strategic Assessments, U.S. Special Operations Command, MacDill Air Force Base, Florida. He's responsible for Special Operations Forces program and manpower assessment, strategic acquisition, resource oversight, and cost analysis, as well as operational test and evaluation. Major General Matra earned his commission from the U.S. Air Force Academy in 1995. He spent most of his career in special operations aviation assignments as an aircraft commander, flight instructor, and evaluator pilot in 2 armed services, and has led expeditionary forces in combat in Iraq and other locations. Prior to this assignment, Major General Matra was the Assistant Commanding General, Joint Special Operations Command, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. General Matra.
Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to represent the men and women of U.S. Special Operations Command as we recognize the legacy of the Office of Strategic Services. The placement of this memorial here at Arlington today stands in fitting testament to this nation's gratitude for 125 OSS military service members' significant role in securing victory in World War II and for safeguarding our freedom and values through a perilous time in history. To the families of OSS members who are here today to share in this event, we thank you personally for your sacrifice. The storied lineage of the OSS, their lineage as embodied in this memorial, continues to inspire the special operations community today. I'll begin my remarks in tribute to one of those Americans memorialized here today. Technical Sergeant Wing B. Joe is also described and depicted in page 26 of the OSS booklet program. Technical Sergeant Wing B. Joe was born in Canton, China as Chow Wing Po and came to the United States in 1914 before becoming an American citizen in 1918 while living in Houston, Texas. After changing his name to Wing Joe and graduating from high school, he returned to China in 1925 to marry and remained there for nearly 5 years. In 1930, he then came back to Houston and worked in his father's restaurant as a cook and waiter before again returning to China in 1933. He was among several Americans who attended the Chinese government flying school in the early 1930s, then amassing over 1,000 flight hours and being credited with downing at least 3 Japanese aircraft. After his plane was destroyed in a bombing raid, Joe continued to fight in mainland China until 1938, when he returned to Houston to manage his family's restaurant and a hotel. He enlisted in the U.S. Army Air Corps at Fort Sam Houston, Texas on the 11th of March 1942 and was then stationed at the technical school at Shepherd Field before joining the OSS. Sergeant Joe was first deployed to Germany and then to Kunming, China. He went missing under undisclosed circumstances in 1945, possibly in the city of Panyu. No trace of Sergeant Joe was ever found, and on August 12, 1946, he was declared deceased. In the U.S., he was survived by his wife, 3 daughters, and a son. While, as is often the case in clandestine and special operations, there are few operational details in this tribute. There are nonetheless several qualities therein that continue to echo strongly through our lineage, ones that tie directly to the men and women of our nation's special operations forces today. One of those is a simple yet heightened awareness of context, an appreciation of the textured nuance of the terrain around us every day, be that human terrain or geography. Another attribute is experiential diversity, often combined with critical thought and individual initiative. The ability to leverage one's own past to represent and defend our values as a nation while walking among people and places that are very different from America. Finally, there is a unique challenge and appreciation of risk in operating where the norm of daily life bears little similarity to our own, where rather than a bullet or bomb, it is perhaps a misspoken word, an errant gesture that can mean the difference between life and death. And even the simplest of actions can or is often intended to be of strategic consequence. There are many more qualities that exemplify the quiet professionals memorialized here. And as a member of today's Special Operations community, it's humbling to walk in their shadows this morning. The formative role of the OSS in influencing America's intelligence and special operations communities remains a crucial part of who we are. U.S. SOCOM looks to the OSS as our organization's forerunner, as evidenced by our command crest, itself an adaptation of OSS insignia. More important than symbology, though, is that the OSS legacy is evident in our SOF ethos, our people, our training, and the strategic effects we bring to bear. That ethos was forged by a distinctly and uniquely courageous group of men and women. While no memorial can ever fully account for the enormous influence of these 125 patriots, this one fittingly stands in testament to and among our nation's finest. It is an honor to represent U.S. Special Operations Command as we recognize these heroes' sacrifices today. Thank you.
It's now my honor to introduce former CI Director George Tenet. Director Tenet served under Presidents Bill Clinton and George W. Bush as the 18th Director of Central Intelligence from 1997 to 2004. He is the second longest serving director in the agency's history. From 1995 to 1997, Director Tenet served as Deputy Director of Central Intelligence. Earlier in his career, he served in a number of positions, including as a Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Intelligence Programs at the National Security Council, and as a Staff Director of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Director Tenet.
Thank you and good morning. It's always humbling and awe-inspiring to visit the hallowed grounds of Arlington National Cemetery. Here lie the mortal remains of some of our country's greatest heroes and heroines. We come together today, however, not to lay to rest a fallen warrior, but to dedicate a marker that lifts up the memory of more than 125 members of the Office of Strategic Services killed in action during World War II, including at least 33 whose final resting place is known only to God. How appropriate it is that the memorial is placed close to the grave sites of not only General Donovan, but OSS veterans and CIA directors William Colby and Richard Helms. Together, they can keep a watchful eye on it. Longtime NBC correspondent and anchor Tom Brokaw, a man I'm pleased to call a friend, has made many contributions during his career, but perhaps the one that will last the longest was coining the phrase, the greatest generation, to describe ordinary citizens, men and women, who served their country with courage, sacrifice, and honor. I believe that among the greatest of the greatest generation were the men and women of the OSS. There had never before been an organization quite like it, but its contributions were critical to the Allied successes in the war effort and extended beyond the Second World War in validating the need for a successor organization that became the Central Intelligence Agency. The OSS was legendary, and as with any real legends, there are also myths that arise. One of the myths about the OSS was that it was completely filled only with blue bloods with Ivy League educations and upper-class panache. And while there were certainly a number who fit that description, who made great contributions, one of the many things that made the organization so remarkable was that it was comprised of patriotic Americans from all walks of life. The ranks of the OSS were filled with heroic men and women with the widest variety of talents and backgrounds. They spoke many languages, were masters of many skills, and most of all united in a determination to do whatever necessary to protect America and our allies from vicious foes. I want to share with you two brief biographies of two OSS members who never made it home and whose sacrifice is honored by the marker we dedicate today and whose personal stories particularly resonate with me. The first was Joseph J. Orland, who was born on March 17, 1915. He grew up in Richmond Hill, Queens, about 10 miles from where I grew up. Orland was a radio repairman when he enlisted in the U.S. Army and joined the U.S. Army Signal Corps in July of 1940. He later joined the OSS Communications Branch and we think was killed when a C-47 transport plane was flying in and crashed in a remote mountainous area in Burma, today Myanmar. Here's the biography of another fallen whose life struck a chord with me. Tech 5 Michalis Tsirmoulas was born on May 17, 1914. He was a Greek immigrant who settled in Perth Amboy, New Jersey, where he worked in a restaurant. He became a member of the Special Reconnaissance Battalion Operations Group, formed from the U.S. Army's famed Greek Battalion, and joined the OSS. After commando training in the United States, Tsirmoulas' team landed on a Greek beach just after midnight on June 18, 1944, and proceeded to its base camp in a mountain village. The team's 10th operation on September 8, 1944, was a night raid on a heavily guarded Dureli station where the vital Athens to Thessaloniki railroad intersected with the track spur to a Nazi-controlled chromium mine. As the team advanced toward the rail line, German machine gunners suddenly began firing, and Tsirmoulas, the forward scout for one squad, received a full burst. After verifying that he was dead, the OSS team was forced to withdraw under heavy fire without recovering his body. Joseph Orland and Michalis Tsirmoulas and all the members of the OSS shared one thing: a willingness to put their colleagues and their country ahead of themselves. We must always remember their sacrifice and the marker that is being dedicated today. It will help ensure that all generations that follow the greatest generation are given an opportunity to reflect on the price that has been paid to keep us free. Thank you all very much.
It's now my honor to introduce the OSS Society's chairman, Dr. Michael Vickers. Dr. Vickers' career as a special operator, CIA operations officer, national security policymaker, and intelligence community leader spanned the last 2 decades of the Cold War through a decade and a half of our war with al-Qaeda, its allies, and its offshoots, service that saw unprecedented senior tenure across Democratic and Republican administrations. From 2011 to 2015, Dr. Vickers served as the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. From 2007 to 2011, he served as the first and only Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations, Low-Intensity Conflict, and Independent Capabilities. Dr. Vickers.
Thank you, Charles. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great honor to be here with you this morning to share in this dedication of the memorial to the men and women of the Office of Strategic Services and honoring those who paid the ultimate sacrifice during our victory in World War II. Having served in 2 of the OSS's successor organizations, the U.S. Army Special Forces and the Central Intelligence Agency, I feel a special attachment to this dedication. During my early years in the 10th Special Forces Group, assigned to several operational detachments. We had missions very similar to what the OSS had in World War II, preparing for a general war with the Soviet Union, going into Eastern Europe and conducting special operations, special reconnaissance and direct action to slow the Soviet advance, and then to link up with resistance movements to liberate Eastern Europe from their Soviet captors. We studied the lessons of the OSS very carefully as we prepared for these missions. But there was one big difference between what we had to do in the 1970s in the 10th Special Forces and the OSS. We prepared for World War. They actually conducted it. Today, I would like to honor by reading the biography of one of those men who was an inspiration to us, Colonel Edward Baronsky. And I feel, again, as Director Tennant mentioned, a special resonance with him. Like Captain Baronsky, my maternal grandparents had emigrated to the United States from Slovakia, and Captain Baronsky was one of the leaders of the Dawes mission to work with the resistance in Slovakia. And now I'd like to read his biography. Edward Baronsky, whose parents immigrated from Poland and Slovakia, was born in New York City and raised in Chicago, not far from where my grandparents lived. A football star at McKinley University, he majored in geography and geology at the University of Illinois, where he was a member of the Cadet Corps while working his way through school as a cook, logger, truck driver, and government clerk. After enlisting in the U.S. Army Air Corps in October 1941, my father was a member of the Air Corps and a B-17 crew member. He spent 2 years at Hill Airfield in Utah before transferring overseas and joining the OSS in September 1943. From his post in Algiers, Baronsky, who spoke 6 languages, including Slovak, strongly advocated for the OSS to infiltrate Slovakia. After 2 planned missions failed to receive clearance, he joined the Dawes mission, serving as commander of the day team tasked with establishing an espionage network across Slovakia. Captain Baronsky and his team of 2 Slovak agents and a civilian radio operator landed on October 7, 1944. Posing as German firewood merchants, they quickly established themselves in a more remote village and began forwarding information that helped target synthetic oil and rocket fuel plants. Baronsky and his radio operator continued their activities until the German forces reached the town. With escape routes blocked by mountain snows, they retreated to another village where they were captured on December 9th and then taken to Mauthausen concentration camp. Despite being singled out for excruciating torture, Captain Baronsky resisted interrogation and offered prayers for his captors. He is survived by his wife and daughter. OSS members like Captain Baronsky were a great inspiration to us, and we honor their memory here today. May God bless the OSS, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I'd now like to ask Admiral Olson, Deputy Director Cohen, Assistant Secretary Holmgren, Heather Hopkins, General Matra, Director Tennant, and Dr. Vickers to join me in unveiling the memorial. So, we should all just grab a piece of it, maybe? Count to 3? Yeah, just count to 3. Everybody grab a piece, Heather. Ready? 1, 2, 3. There we go.